Conversation.
Wait a minute. Limp Pig was banned in the UK in 1992 and in the US in 1978. That means my memories must be real. And it means I've never tasted the delicious sweetness of Limp Pig chips.
Hello and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell, and you may know my co-host today from the periphery of DK Vine, as they've appeared on many of our Sea of Thieves streams on Sunday mornings. They also run Golden Sands blog post with our own Jeff Onen, and they are pretty prominent in the Sea of Thieves community and Rare fandom outside of the purview of DK Vine. Please welcome to the conversation, Dray.
Bonjour.
Comment
I don't know how else to introduce myself. I could have said ahoy. Ahoy would have made more sense.
Ahoy, yeah. You start speaking
Ahoy.
French, and I'm just like, well, I could talk to you about the Donkey Kong Country cartoon show. I could talk to you about
I love that.
I could talk to you about the time that Donkey, Diddy, Funky, and Dixie raced on the streets of Paris in both Mario
Yes,
Kart
they
Tour and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. But we're not talking about any of that today. We are talking about EGX, which is technically EGX and MCM Comic Con, which was held
This year, yeah.
This year. They conjoined them. They combined them like some sort of Cronenbergian monstrosity for Halloween. It was held.
Monstrosity is the right word.
It was held from October 25th to the 27th at the Excel, or Exhibition Center, London. And Dray, you attended for one day, Saturday, the 26th, but it was the most monumental, or I should say most important day for our interest, because they had significant and several DKU relevant events, as they held panels from both Playtonic and Rare, but also a 30 years of Donkey Kong Country panel as well. And, you know, these trade shows and conventions that happen outside of the continental United States, you know, I keep abreast of it, but it's one of those things where I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm not going to go to Gamescom or anything. I'm not going to go to Germany for the off chance that Rare will be doing something Sea of Thieves related. You know, I attended E3 for 5 years in a row, the last 5 years of in-person attendance at E3. And that was pretty relevant for my job description here at DK Vine, because E3 was the nexus. It was the hub of all video game announcements. And it was a particularly monumental 5 years for the DKU, as well, as it was the onset of the Rare Renaissance and Platonic, Rare Replay, Sea of Thieves, you know, culminating with Banjo and Kazooie getting into Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And going to E3 as a regular occurrence, I could bake that into my job duties. But these other trade shows and conventions, especially the ones in Europe, I'm just like, well, that's pretty cost prohibitive, considering I'm operating on a shoestring budget to keep DK Vine running. And there's not going to be really that much yield as far as news that would require an in-person Donkey Kong journalist. So I usually don't pay any of this heed, right? But EGX this year, you know, I heard like Rare was going to be doing a Sea of Thieves panel months ago, and I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. You know?
Yeah,
I
they
mean,
seem to do one pretty regularly now.
I love Sea of Thieves. I love Rare. But just hearing news about Sea of Thieves at one of these things is not worth the 8-hour flight and lodging, you know, to attend. And then a little bit after that, we learned that they were going to do a 30 years of Donkey Kong Country panel. It's like, well, that's marginally more interesting, but I don't know how much more they can really squeeze out of that dish rag, considering we pretty much know so much there is to know about the development and history of Donkey Kong Country. Once people like Greg Mails got on social media, it was pretty much a constant deluge of information from there.
Yeah.
But then Playtonic announced they were doing a panel. And in addition to that, it would be the first chance for people to play Yooka-Replaylee. And then I was just starting to think, oh, geez, this is kind of like a miniature E3. Because there's Donkey Kong stuff, there's Rare stuff, and there's Platonic stuff, the three pillars. And I was starting to regret my decision. There was a little bit of lament on my end. I was like, oh, I should have had, an extra grand in the bank to break out in case of emergencies such as this. Oh, well, I can't go. But as fate would have it, I think the very day Platonic, really pushed that they were going, you mentioned that you were attending. And I thought, well,
yeah,
I could just deputize Dray and have a official DK Vine correspondent there. No muss, no fuss.
Yeah, I think it was the Platonic thing as well that pushed me into going. Because it was like, Sea of Thieves, that would be cool. Donkey Kong Country, yeah, that would be really cool. And then seeing who's on the panel was like, okay, that's really cool. And then Platonic was like, all right, yeah, Yooka-Replaylee is looking really interesting. Getting a chance to see a bit more about that, yeah.
Yeah, once E3 fell, there really hasn't been any reason to have sort of all three under the same roof at any event. And considering the relatively short drive from the English Midlands, which is where both Rare and Playtonic are headquartered and where Donkey Kong Country was born, it makes sense that they would attend. And this is a pretty significant year considering it's the 30th anniversary of Donkey Kong Country. And, Playtonic has really come out of the shadows again to announce the first of several projects they're working on and in sort of their new restructured growth spurt. So, yeah, it was just like, I'm going to have Dray attend, and they were already attending, so it wasn't like I was forcing you to attend, but I was like, Dray, while you're there, I know you're only there for one day, but would you mind attending? I didn't even push you towards the Sea of Thieves panel. I figured you would do that yourself, but I was like, would you mind attending the Donkey Kong Country panel, the Playtonic panel, and would you mind playing Yooka-Replaylee and also Dunk Dunk, the Platonic Friends game? Dunk Dunk, the Platonic Friends game that will have Yuka and Laylee in it as playable characters. So, I've already run a report on your experiences on dkvine.com, which is a terrific website, mind you.
Everyone should visit it.
It has up-to-the-minute news and exclusive info on Donkey Kong, Rare, and Playtonic. And, you can read that article, as I hope you've already done. But I'd like to get a little bit more in-depth, specifically about how the games felt and some anecdotes from the panels that you might not have shared with me. So we're going to get into that on this episode of The Kongversation. But before we do, I would like to remind everyone that contrary to what the YouTube algorithm has told you, or not told you in this case, the new DKU Lore Tour video is up right now on our YouTube channel. If you are listening to this episode of The Kongversation on YouTube, I'm going to drop it down for you right now. Just see, it just came down. You can click that and go watch that video. When is Donkey Kong's birthday? Is the question posited by the video. I have an answer, a very well-researched answer, mind you, in a very entertaining and tight 18 minutes. Nobody's watching this, Dray, because
they should watch it. They should find out, and they should have a discussion on if they agree with you on when you have placed DK's birthday, or if they disagree with you and what their research is. But I think you've got a well-reasoned argument.
I have, I think, an airtight argument. YouTube, like I said, has just kind of buried this. Nobody's watching this video.
If you'd have, like, made the video, like, what political alignment is Donkey Kong, I think maybe it would have been pushed a bit more at the moment, but...
Right, you know,
yeah.
Long red tie, Diddy wears a red hat with white font.
Mm-hmm.
I could really get incendiary there. I could really just stoke the fires. Of course, I would have to have... I'm complaining about the lack of engagement in some of my latest YouTube videos, and I can only... I've talked about this with some other content creators who have had far more success on YouTube than I have, and they agree that the algorithm is punishing us for some reason, and woe is me. But I need to make it sexier is the problem. I'm trusting that the audience will find
entice
it.
Them. Yeah, you need to put down a little bit of a cookie crumb trail for people to come. You need to have thumbnails with sexy Donkey Kong, which you can do that. You've got plenty of renders of DK's immaculate arse.
Yes, so. And I need to have characters with bug eyes on the thumbnail, or me making an O face.
Put the bug eyes on Donkey Kong's arse.
Yeah, or me making an O face looking at Donkey Kong's ass. And I need to have, random capitalized words, like all caps, in the middle of the title. It's on me for not
bowing down to the algorithm.
Right, right. So you can watch it if you want.
So you go watch that.
I think it's a
You can
sexy
pause
video.
this if you're listening to it.
Yeah.
And then go over, come back. We'll wait for you.
Thank you. When is Donkey Kong's birthday? You can find out when it rolls around again, so you can be ready for it. Also, DK Vine is on Blue Sky, which is, I believe, the fastest growing social media site in the last couple of months. And you can find us. You can just go to dkvine.com/Blue Sky, or just type us into the search bar on Blue Sky. We come right up. Give us a follow. It's nice. Been nice to see a lot of the Rare community has finally started coming over to Blue Sky. It's robust. It is active.
It's nice.
Really?
Yeah. It's pleasant, active. People are having good discussions.
Good discussions. Speaking of algorithms, no algorithm. You follow the people you want to follow, and then they're in your feed in chronological order, and that's it.
Oh my god, chronological order. Oh.
Yeah. So
how I've missed that.
I've talked about this with some people who don't want to make the jump because they've cultivated such large Twitter followers. They've got like, I've got nearly 10,000 followers on Twitter. Why would I jump over? And it's like, well, here's the thing. Your followers aren't seeing every tweet you do. Like just removing what Twitter has become, chances are you will have far greater engagement even with less followers on Blue Sky than you will on Twitter. Except for like the real like black swan events where one of your tweets will go viral for seemingly no reason. Blue Sky has been really great as far as people are seeing my stuff. And like the people who are following me are seeing my stuff. And so even though I only have 1/10 of the audience I built on Twitter, it's definitely getting more engagement. And I just feel like people are letting their hair down a little bit more on Blue Sky. It's not really that like icky social media feeling yet. So it's been nice. So be sure to check it out. Give us a follow on Blue Sky. And finally, DK Vine is on Patreon. I don't need to tell anybody that who listens to the conversation. You all know, but DK Vine, we are funded almost entirely by our patrons, our lovely, lovely patrons. Keeps the dream of Donkey Kong journalism alive for another month. So if you like what we do at DK Vine, if you approve of the Kongversation or DKU Lorator or what have you, think about becoming a DK Vine patron for just $1 a month. It would go a long way towards replenishing our coffers and allow me to do more with DK Vine, to really build it, to continue to expand outwards, and to have more world-beating Donkey Kong Universe content. So, yeah, give it a thought. dkvine.com/Patreon. Okay, Dre.
Hello, that's me.
Yes, you were at EGX on October 26th.
MCM Comic Con on the 26th of October in the
Yes.
year of our Lord 2024.
Just generally speaking, how was your experience?
So the day was pretty cool. I liked actually going around and watching the panels and meeting with the people, but the event itself just felt really a bit overwhelming. There was a lot of people. I think somebody said that there was more people here than there was last year. And obviously it's the two events, so it's two different groups of people kind of coming together. So you'd think it'd be more people.
It's like
There's a lot of
West Side
dice.
Story, like both sides coming at each other,
Yeah, exactly
snapping
like
their
West
thumbs.
Side Story.
Yeah.
There wasn't much snapping of thumbs. There was snapping of other things. I don't know what I mean
Towels?
by that. Yeah, towels. There you go. Cosplays? What cosplays snap?
Yeah.
Thanos' snapping.
I don't know how much of an introvert you are by nature, but I know that whenever I would attend these big events, it would be overwhelming, and I would kind of have to really turn it on. I've talked about how being an introvert by nature, doing something like the Kongversation, it's really a learned skill. It doesn't come naturally, and I really have to just dial myself up to 11 to do it, and it's exhausting. And E3 was the same type of thing. Fortunately, E3, the adrenaline would continually pump into you, so the exhaustion would hit when you would leave the show floor. You get a second wind to do your videos or podcasts or news articles from your lodging, and then you'd sleep for a few hours, you get up and do it again. But it would be basically just an exhilarating week, and then you would leave, and then you would crash for days afterwards. So at the very least, you were only there for one day. I mean, less than one day. You didn't have to, go to a
a hotel or anything. There was no lodgings involved in it. It was just get there, get back. It was a long day for other reasons, but yeah. I think there was several different things happening in London. The train on the way back was full of drunk people.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, they had a fight. It was great. England, everybody.
With E3, it was always kind of different for me because E3 is, of course, just dedicated to video games, and I have my little niche there, and so I could kind of just swim.
You can hide into it, right? Meld into that kind of that crowd. I think you were going to say swim with the flow of it.
I can kind of, go with the current. DK Vine's a small outlet. I'm not there for any AAA games, but I feel like I have a purpose and a place there. With the Comic-Con aspect, I could imagine it being a little bit disorienting. Have so much going on.
In the past, EGX has just been its own thing, and it's felt a little bit better for that. This time around, it was the two, and I was assuming that. So the way that Excel Center is set up is it's a main concourse and then two halls either side of that concourse.
Uh-huh.
So I was assuming that one side would be EGX and the other side would be MCM. That wasn't really the case. It was just sort of a model. There was the core EGX stuff in their S side, south rooms. I mean they're south. It's N and S. So there was that kind of area that had the EGX arena, the retro gaming section, and the section where you can try out the video games current companies have brought. But otherwise, it was all kind of mashed in.
Yeah,
it was strange. Finding the meet and greet section was odd.
I'm somebody who gets anxiety going to the grocery store. I've talked about this, where just being in a large group of people, I have this weird psychological hang up. And I think a lot of people probably have this. We just don't talk about it, where whenever I'm in an environment that's not like tailored for my weird, like freakish self-described job title as a Donkey Kong journalist. So when I'm in a grocery store, just buying food and beverages, I feel like I'm in people's way. I feel like, for whatever reason, I don't have as much value as everyone else there does, and therefore I'm a nuisance. I'm a problem. And I have to accommodate everyone else coming through with their big shopping carts. And it starts to just stack up in my brain where I'm just like, you piece of shit. You piece of shit. You're in everybody's way. Why don't you just go home, hide under the covers? It's where you belong. It's not psychologically healthy, but I think it stems back from childhood where I was, in environments like that with like my mom, and I would kind of like, wander away. I would see something and I would inevitably get in somebody's path, and she would be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Don't be in people's way. Don't be in people's way." And it just kind of buries in your subconscious, where when you're a kid, you recognize that you are not accepted as a full human being, as a full citizen of this planet. And nobody ever tells you you're past that. You're an adult now. You deserve.
You can take up as much space. Yeah.
Yeah, you're entitled to just as much as everyone else. And so it kind of escalates, especially if you just don't like a lot of commotion. If you don't like a lot of hustle and bustle, being in an environment, any environment where you have that, it's hell. It is hell. And I was that way before COVID, and then COVID hit, and then all of a sudden I had extra reason to be suspicious of the teeming masses.
Yeah, I don't know if COVID made it worse for me or if it was always like that with myself, but yeah, I do just tend to avoid people. It helps I wear all black. People generally then try and avoid me. So there's that bonus.
Yeah. That's why I wear the Donkey Kong costume. Yeah. I just,
Yeah, exactly. Do we report them for nudity? He's just wearing a tie.
With a just spectacular ass.
Spectacular ass, yeah. We don't want to report him. It's so good.
Yeah. So it always helps, attending this stuff with an extra person or like a group of people. Like I've always said, E3 was always fun whenever we would have two people working in concert with each other, or E3 2019 when there was 4 of us, and it just felt like, that pack mentality where you have the safety number. So I would have been there with you, Dray, had I, planned this out 6 months in advance.
Had you had that $1,000 in the bank.
Right. Unfortunately,
we need 1,000 patrons, £1, $1 even. There you go.
Or, the YouTube algorithm could stop messing around with us.
Well, yeah, that would also be nice. That'd be super nice of YouTube. Yeah, no, I got that you were there in spirit, and that was mainly what I was trying to do, to punch through. I did have a look around at the different stalls, because I've been to a Comic-Con before as well, so I kind of know the building. That helps. Mm-hmm. But man, it's a lot of D&D stuff. Last time I was there, it was a lot of Funko Pops. Now it's just a lot of D&D stuff.
I feel like the bubble has burst for Funko Pop. Where
100%.
It's still a thing, but it's not the, just nucleus of all geek culture like it was. I think up until the pandemic. I think the pandemic and it just stopped the mass Funko hoarding, and yeah, it just kind of on the periphery again. I think it's like the Beanie Baby burst of the 1990s, where Beanie Babies are still a thing, obviously, and there's still Beanie Baby collectors, but it's not like the end all be all of little stuffed animals.
Yeah, little knick-knack kind of things to collect. Yeah, Beanie Babies. Yeah, they were cool. At least they were different, not Funko Pops.
Yeah, like I do appreciate with the Funko Pops how like deep they got into just
into
properties.
certain fandoms and whatnot.
Yeah, and we eventually got the Banjo and Kazooie Funko Pop. Like, it took so long to get a DKU Funko Pop, and we finally did this year. But, yeah, like, it is kind of depressing sometimes, and I saw the evolution at E3. By the time we got to the last in-person E3, there was just so much glut of that kind of stuff in like the shop area and stuff. And the fact that E3 even had a shop area was kind of disconcerting because when I first started going, it was just like, oh, you can get an E3 t-shirt, some like memorabilia, but it's not really like this Comic-Con style. We're going to have all these vendors. We're going to, push all of this like cheap convention exclusive crap on you.
Was that when they opened it up to the public, really? Because at that point it does become commercial rather than what it was just, here's the latest games people are working on. Industry people get to try them out, look at them and see what they're like.
Yeah, so
that's what it was. And then, yeah. I'm
not trying to keep focusing on E3 because we do need to discuss
cool.
EGX.
I think it's a good.
Yeah. Like E3's downfall was they tried to chase Comic-Con. They tried to chase the Comic-Con model, and they took what was a trade show for the industry and for journalists in the industry, and they did open it up to the public, which, I don't really have any qualms with, but
no, that's fine. Yeah.
They did strike a better balance by the end where they had dedicated times for just journalists, and then they would open it up to the public, so it wouldn't really crowd out the people who were there to actually cover the games. And, I mean, the irony being, they opened it up right when DK Vine got journalistic credentials. So we could have just attended as the public, but you get a little bit more leeway as a journalist with the journalist badge, the media badge. But it was kind of like, and we talked about this throughout our various E3 episodes, turning E3 into kind of like a theme park environment. And it was just kind of like, do you think I'm dumb? Do you think I'm stupid? Are you talking down to me? Don't talk down to me.
Yeah. We'll see if that happens to EGX and Comic-Con. I don't know if it will, because I don't think they're like hitting that critical point of exposure yet over here.
They certainly had a lot going on this year. And
they did.
The 30 years of Donkey Kong Country panel. This was, I think, on a surface level, might have been what would be most interesting to the majority of our audience, even if it is just well-worn territory. I think it's one of those things where if you were there, you would definitely want to attend this, because it was a panel with Greg Mayles, Steve Mayles, Kev Bayless, and David Wise, which I think it's wild that Greg participated in this. Because one, he's very shy. He's a fellow introvert, and two, he's part of Rare, and he doesn't generally kind of mix in with the Playtonic folk who left Rare and formed Playtonic or work with Playtonic. So it's really cool. Like whenever you see, say, the Mayles brothers, Greg and Steve, reunited in the context of their professional work, and being on the same stage together, because it is just one big family, more or less, but we're conditioned to think of them as separate things now. And yeah, it was just really awesome to see them all together up there.
We had a good time all together as well. I think it's fair to say this, but Greg was saying like that's the first time in 17 years that he's actually seen David Wise. So,
wow.
Yeah.
I think trying to do the math there, that's... I guess that would make sense, considering when Dave left Rare,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Dave already seems to be jet setting around and doing stuff as well.
Yeah.
At least more recent years.
Yeah, well, and he's got like the partnership with Kev. They do stuff together. They were all in the Kongversation together a few years back, so they kind of come as a tandem, a pair, a buddy duo, if you will. What did they discuss?
Yeah. So mostly, the 30 years of DKC, Donkey Kong Country panel. Well, a lot of it was sort of like the groundworks of Donkey Kong Country, how they got that opportunity to make the game, their designs for it. There was a lot of talk on sort of the design of Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong.
Mm-hmm.
Kev described Donkey Kong as him just putting Battletoad's eyes on the Donkey Kong character that Nintendo gave him, and they were like happy with that. Give him a tie. It's kind of entertaining.
Yeah.
And then if you know about like Diddy Kong's origins as well, that
sure.
They wanted like some way to represent the character being hit. They didn't want to make it abstract and weird because they liked the UI-less nature of it all because the game was so pretty. They didn't want to put any of that on there, so they wanted a second character. They were redesigning DK Jr., but Nintendo didn't like that, and that's where they came up with Diddy Kong, who was originally Dinky Kong. And yeah, Kev was then, just ripped off the Cocoa Puffs monkey. I don't know if you have the Cocoa Puffs monkey over in the US.
It's Cocoa Krispies over here. I don't know if they're the same cereal.
Oh, but, okay.
So the Rice Krispies mascots are Snap, Crackle, and Pop. These little like
Pop,
elves.
Yeah.
And eventually they retired the monkey for Cocoa Krispies, and they just brought in Snap, Crackle, and Pop for kind of brand cohesion.
Oh, okay. But yeah, Diddy's a bit based on that. Yeah, I don't know where you want me to start, really. Like, because it was just sort of like starting about how they even given the property of Donkey Kong, and then where they then went with that and various different design elements.
I kind of want to know about that just a little bit, just because it is when this episode, goes live. It is November, and we're gonna have lots of Donkey Kong Country programming for the Kongversation this month for its 30th anniversary. So why don't we start with just what they said about how Rare got the Donkey Kong property and were able to reinvent Donkey Kong and his world for the next, almost decade.
Well, yeah, 30, yeah. Well, yeah, decade, definitely, yeah. Probably a little bit beyond that. So, it starts obviously with the CGI machines that they got. I always forget the name of them. But I think that's like the classic, everybody kind of knows about that. Like, as a some Sega company was putting out an Aladdin game around the same time that was boasting these really good graphics. Rare bought in the machines so that they could sort of get ahead of the curve with the graphics. Kev was saying that he'd made a fighting game demo within those machines, and Nintendo had come over and seen it. And then, like, the next day, he was faxed over a picture of Donkey Kong, and that was like, yeah, gonna be working on that. So it's just sort of like no, like, reason given, I suppose, from Nintendo as to, you made this fighting game of, like, two martial artist people in a gymnasium. We think that's going to work amazingly for Donkey Kong.
Well, we know now, thanks to the Nintendo leaks from a few years back, that Nintendo was trying to revive Donkey Kong around that same time. They were working on the Super Donkey Kong concept, some of which eventually went into Yoshi's Island. But I think they were struggling to really figure out a direction for that, and then Rare had this amazing hardware,
new
and
technology,
I think Miyamoto in particular was like, this would really like put Donkey Kong on a pedestal again, really give him his own kind of look and identity. And so that's why they were like, hey, why don't you try Donkey Kong and we'll do something else?
Mm-hmm. It probably makes a lot of sense. Yeah, you give it to a different company. If Nintendo was sitting there going like, well, we've got a platformer in Mario, and Mario's obviously gone off and evolved in its own way. What do you want Donkey Kong to do? I mean, ultimately, it turned out as a platformer, but I guess if it's an outside company doing it, it doesn't feel like you're at odds with yourself so much.
No, and they were able to give it its own identity and feel that I don't think Nintendo would have really been able to conceive
they
on
would have
their
gone
own.
that direction.
Yeah.
I definitely don't think they would have. So yeah, that's kind of how the project started, as Kev explained it. They were just sort of given the license and then told they could do what they wanted with it. From the sounds of it, they had a lot of free reign. They tried the Donkey Kong and the Golden Bananas concept, Donkey Kong versus Super Wario as well. There's another one that they showed off.
that would be...
The Super Wario one's interesting, because it was just, apparently Greg was like, they got Donkey Kong. How many more Nintendo characters could they get in, basically, was the idea.
It's such a weird thing to think about, how if they had gone with that and Nintendo signed off on that, how little I would probably care about Donkey Kong today.
Yeah, because I don't think you'd get a lot of the nature stuff if it had gone with that.
Yeah, and you wouldn't...
About the natural world.
You wouldn't really have Donkey Kong's own identity then, would you? It would be forever... It would be forever, like, meshed.
Tied together.
Yeah, with this, like, Mario, like, sub-series kind of status. And I know Donkey Kong and Mario are linked, and they, always appear together in stuff, up to and including the Super Mario Brothers movie. But at the end of the day, Donkey Kong still has his own identity, sans Mario.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it had been Donkey Kong versus Super Wario, I think my capacity of caring about the game would have been far less. And I don't think I would be sitting here with you today discussing the 30 years of Donkey Kong Country panel at EGX.
Definitely not.
Or 30 years of Donkey Kong versus Super Wario.
Versus Super Wario.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that was kind of like some of the initial concepts when they were talking about story. So I'm kind of like going through how they went through in the panel. So then started talking a little bit about the story, and just like, you didn't really need something like Tolkien. You just needed enough motivation for the players. When asked by, so I didn't mention, like, the person hosting the panel was Chris String, who is like game industry person.
Mm-hmm.
What's the website? I think the website is Game Industry.
GameIndustry.biz.
He organises. Yeah, .biz. There you go. I got the biz part in my head, and I couldn't remember it was GameBiz.industry. Yeah. So I think he founded that, but he also sort of organises a lot of EGX by the sounds of it, and does a lot with Rare. But yes, he was the host, and he did ask, like, why was it that the Kremlings wanted the bananas? And Greg was like, not really sure why. It just needed a reason for the players to...
Well, Greg, allow me to explain it to you, all right? Since you're so clearly ignorant of your own creations. The Kremlings wanted the bananas because the Kremlings like bananas. That's a
good reason.
Yeah.
It's a very good reason. Apparently there was a longer script at one point during the development, but it did just get cut down because it was like, we could have all this story, or you could have more gameplay. And they were like, we'll just have more gameplay. I think that's a good trade-off, I think.
I know Greg and this team, they always undersell what they do. They're very English in that way.
Yeah.
They talk down what they've done, but the level of environmental storytelling that they were able to put into Donkey Kong Country and later games to really make the world feel real and fleshed out, despite being, a cartoony, kind of goofy environment. At least the earlier games never felt that way, and they're always felt this degree of
really grounded
grounded realism with a cartoony veneer. And there would be all these little background details that you could pick up and kind of elevate and say like, oh, that's interesting. There was just enough to go off of. Like that would always like really fire up the imagination and make you ponder a little bit more about the world and go a little bit deeper. And then the next game would come out, or like Donkey Kong Land would come out and really get a little bit more in depth, but still leave enough breadcrumbs where you're just constantly speculating, which is the rabbit hole I went down in very quick fashion.
I think it's good that they went with that one, because I don't remember where exactly it was in the panel they said it. There was another concept, and you probably already know about this, about there being multiple islands rather than just DK Island. And I think keeping it just a DK Island does really solidify and ground that world, because it's all there in that one place. It's not like, oh, well, this is going to be the more sandy and more deserty island that doesn't really connect to what you've been through. There's like the through pattern of things in the background, like you say, of, well, this is over here. You can see these sort of architecture building up in that level, and then as you move through it, then you get more. I don't know how they came across that, really, like why they decided to put all that in there. I don't know if it was just the environmental artists being like, we will do something a bit more than just trees.
Well, I mean, you can clearly see the influences of this group of Gen Xers who, like, probably came up on Star Wars and Indiana Jones. You've got the Ewok Village, you've got the minecart. I mean, it's clear where their inspirations lie, but I do agree, like, just starting that first game on Donkey Kong Island, like, keeping it small, relatively small. I mean, it's a huge, implausibly huge island, but it really, like, it made a very inviting, fascinating setting. And then from there, they could expand outwards, introduce like more islets later on, and then more islands later on as the series and universe expanded. I mean, the whole notion of the rare archipelago that came about.
It really comes from that, doesn't it?
Yeah. Diddy Kong Racing, and it really, like, I think would have been cheapened if Donkey Kong Island didn't exist, or it was less interesting because it was just a jungle, and then from there you go to Desert Island, or like, I think that like later games, post Rare, like Jungle Climber, Tropical Freeze, they would do that, and it's fine because the foundation, the basis is already there and unsullied.
They can just develop on from there.
Yeah. You mentioned the Kremlings, and I know they discussed quite a bit about the evolution of the Kremlings. And
yes,
you know,
they did.
It's interesting because I know different people from the team have contradictory explanations about the Kremlings. I think the most commonly held wisdom is that the Kremlings were devised for a rare game that never really got off the ground, a scrapped point-and-click adventure called Johnny Blastoff. But I know...
okay, I had a different name.
Well, yeah, because Kev is claiming a different name now, but I think he's wrong. And I feel bad saying that, but I also know that when you are the creator, when you are the creator of something and it's your job, it's a very different perspective than when you're a hyper fan of something, because it's my job to keep track of all of this bullshit. And I also have a really good memory. So, just looking at all of the notes and evolution of it, I think Johnny Blastoff is the most agreed upon origin point of the Kremlings. I know Kev is now claiming it was something different. I think Kev just forgot.
Maybe. So they were saying like it was from another project that the Kremlins came from.
Yeah.
The name that I got that Greg said was Eddie Snowman in The Incredible something. I didn't catch the last word that he said.
Oh, that's a new one. That's
Eddie
a new
Snowman.
one. I've never heard. Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
They
Pester
can't
Greg.
agree. Yeah, okay.
They can't even agree, yeah. I think, like, if you're trying to, like, plumb your brain and go back to a project that didn't get off the ground and maybe you didn't have a lot of affinity for, then, yeah, it is difficult to, like, oh, yeah, they come from somewhere else. You can't quite remember what. There's concepts thrown around. But, yeah, they came from elsewhere. They were just trying to figure out baddies for the game, and they had them around, brought them in. It sounded like Steve Mails did a lot of the work trying to like get them to mesh into the world.
Yeah.
So like at that point, it sounded like they'd already kind of like got a lot of the jungles, the environments, things like the tires, ropes, barrels. So then it was like putting them into the world. Apparently there's not that much early concept art of them. And James Ryman is responsible for a good chunk of what there is.
Yeah, so this isn't a name that I was familiar with as far as their origins in relation to the Kremlings and at Rare, because they left Rare.
Yeah, they weren't there for very long.
Yeah.
That's from what I understand. Just enough to do some artwork for various different projects in different ways. And yeah, Steve and Kev were like, they're the person who could actually draw. And they said that they went on to found or become a core artist of Warhammer or one of those kind of things. And I looked him up, and if it's the same James Ryman, then he's done a lot of like gothic, alternative rock kind of art. I don't know if you'd see it over in the US, but you kind of like get these calendars of like skeletons playing guitars or on motorbikes and very sexy women who are fairies or demons, that kind of thing.
We have similar calendars and pinups, but yeah, I don't know. It seems
the style's exactly the same.
Yeah, it seems not a dime a dozen, but there are a lot of different artists who specialize in that over here.
So yeah, he had a hand in solidifying kind of like the Kremlin look as we have it now, because there was, and I think you put it in the article, there was one image of like 3 Kremlings that they didn't go with. That was quite early on. They had a little bit more. I don't know. I feel like they would have fit in with Battletoads more. I don't know if it's just whoever drew it had that kind of thing.
It reminded me of that very early 1990s kind of Ninja Turtles aesthetic that Battletoads was really...
that as well. That was also driving on that, wasn't it?
Playing up, yeah. And I think Steve Mails is significantly responsible for kind of dialing that back and distilling it into the Kremlings we know today.
Mm-hmm. The idea of like them becoming like militaristic or having like a monarchy as well just sort of came about from trying different things to get them to fit in and to like indicate that you couldn't like jump on them, because obviously the helmet, like, oh, he's got a helmet on, you can't jump onto this one to beat them. So there's that sort of like design thing. But yeah, it wasn't also all just Steve working on them. Greg apparently gave a lot of like initial ideas with sketches that he'd do.
Yeah,
Steve would flesh them back out. Yeah.
I learned, I was really fascinated because I don't know if I'd ever seen this image of like potential Kremlin soldiers, Kremlin attack patterns that they shared for their like concepts and ideas, because one of them was a Kremlin with a blunderbuss. And I was just like, interesting that they wanted to put blunderbusses in there as early as the first game.
Mm-hmm. So obviously that does make it into the second game.
Yes, and Sea of Thieves as well.
Yeah, and Sea of Thieves. Yeah, like, I can't remember why it was they explained why it was like, military for the first one and then pirates for the second. Or it was just sort of like, they were like trying out the themings of them and then what would work within their kind of theming.
Yeah.
I don't think they spoke too much about that. But yeah, like I say, also all the concept art, I apologize if the pictures that I took weren't of great quality. I don't think my camera is that great. And I wasn't sitting quite as close as I'd like to have. But yeah, they showed quite a lot of concept art. I think a good chunk of that's probably already on like Greg Mails's Twitter at some point in the past.
Right.
But there was quite a lot in there as well that seemed pretty new. Different like post-it notes of stuff or just pieces of paper that they've discovered.
Yeah, they went into Greg's habit of breaking things down using post-it notes or sticky notes.
Yeah, so like that was something that he kind of picked up on this project because beforehand he would just like draw out on paper, but then found out like it wasn't so good because if you wanted to then try and get rid of something that you didn't want on there anymore or change it around, trying to erase it just made the paper scruffier. So he just on a whim picked up a post-it note and was like, you know what, you can just rearrange these in any way and you can get them to people quicker as well. So you can like just doodle it out, give it to an artist or the environmental artist, like, oh, I want to change this part of the platforming level to have this here and put that one over at the end. Like it's an interesting one because looking back at it, it does allow a lot of freedom, even if it then does take up your entire office.
Yeah.
Just post-it notes and cost a lot because they were expensive in the 90s.
I was going to say, that it would be not the cheapest way to break down level designs, considering just sheets of paper would be far more economically viable.
Mm-hmm.
So they also discussed, I think, the legacy that the game has had, the impact it had. They shared like images of like some of the relatively contemporary merchandise. I noticed they had the like Donkey Kong action figure line from the late 90s on there. And I'm like, well, that's kind of like 5 years away
afterwards. But it's still, they spoke about, because I'm just trying to go through my notes and see exactly what part it was. Because they started talking about it as like the legacy of aquatic ambience. And if when Dave wrote it, if he knew that was going to be a hit that people gravitated towards and became kind of anthemic for the game, or like one of those, this is what video game music can kind of achieve sort of things. So he was like, no, I just wrote it and put it in there. It wasn't until OCR, OCR remixes, they started doing stuff and he became aware of them, that he really realized the impact of it. But he does also remember Trent Reznor saying that he liked aquatic ambience in an interview. Yeah, it's quite funny.
I had no idea.
There you go. There's a Nine Inch Nails connection. Always a Nine Inch Nails connection.
Wow, interesting.
So there's that. Apparently Steve didn't like the song. He thought it was too sedate and he wanted something a bit more upbeat. He wrote a note at the behest of one of the Stamper brothers, was like, write him a note, tell him it's not very good, leave it on his desk. So he did that. Apparently Dave sent something back very rude, but Dave doesn't remember anything about this note. So that's quite funny.
Art is subjective, and it
is, yes.
You never know what you work on that will be what catches fire.
As well as them, like, working on the game itself, a question that they had was, are people going to enjoy this? Because outside a handful of trade shows and stuff, they were only like internally playtesting in their own team. So not anybody else really got the game until the game was out. And it wasn't until December that they saw that people were digging it. The sales were really good. And then after that, merch started happening. Yeah. Like, they said that they were quite lucky to have Nintendo as the partner to like be the ones to do all the advertising, the merchandising, and all that stuff completely outside of what they were doing. Obviously, Nintendo knew at that point that what the game was, the designs of certain things, so they could kind of pick it up and obviously create the merchandise. But yeah, they weren't really aware of it until like they themselves encountered it in the wild.
Well, I know like Nintendo like knew this game was going to be a massive hit That's
I don't
summer.
know at what point they realised it. Because, they say summer it was shown off at the...
CES.
Yes. I'm trying to remember what does it stand for again?
Consumer Electronics Show.
Oh, Super Electronics Show. Okay. Was Space
World. Space World was the one in Japan. CES.
Oh, okay.
CES was in Chicago. And
before.
Yeah, it was the predecessor to E3.
E3.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they showed it off, and it was at that point that the first time an audience outside of Rare and Nintendo had seen the game, and they were blown away by the response of it, because, people were applauding. And then they were like, okay, yeah, good. Greg said an anecdote that he just remembers, that's good, but he remembers the people applauding, but in his own head worrying, like, oh, we've got to finish this by November.
It would become a reoccurring motif for the basis of that team throughout the 90s, showing off a game that summer, having a big response, and then realizing they have to finish it. Of course, with Banjo-Kazooie...
They actually have to finish it, yeah.
Yeah, with Banjo-Kazooie, they didn't really get there.
Unfortunately, yeah.
No.
But I think they were like, this one needs to... Because they were also worried about being beaten to the punch by any other studio that are working on something, like within that technology, or just in graphics in general. They did believe entirely in what they had was good. They didn't know how good, but they were like, this is amazing graphics, amazing technology that they're working with, but will it catch on with people? Because back when they showed it off the first time to Nintendo after they'd done a few levels, one person did come over and say, don't know if people are going to like this. It's too 3D. It might confuse people. Which is like, it's too 3D.
Yeah.
I guess back then, I can get that kind of complaint, but it's still kind of wild to hear that was a genuine worry somebody had. But
then the Virtual Boy came out and confirmed their fears. Oh,
this is too 3D.
Too 3D. People are terrified.
So it was. They didn't really realize the kind of impact that it had and all the different stuff. Like, they didn't get a lot of the merch themselves as well, which is interesting. It's like Greg was saying that he remembers going to a UFO machine in Kyoto somewhere and just trying to win like a Donkey Kong plushie and constantly being thwarted by it. And then the Japanese man who was like in charge of the machine just kept moving it slightly so they could try and get it. They eventually did.
That's nice. That's very kind.
That's nice, at least,
It's funny to me how they were just completely unaware of how the game would catch on like wildfire. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's the game more than any other game that really kicked off Rare becoming a household name. Obviously, there are people who knew of Rare, who knew of the studio. They had a footprint in the video game industry, but Donkey Kong Country is what put Rare on that like elevated plane where Nintendo fans viewed Rare as this holy institute. And from there, they had just hit after hit after hit throughout the rest of the decade. And eventually, they could move out of the Manor House and build Manor Park. And it really all starts with Donkey Kong Country and Killer Instinct to a lesser extent. So, it's just amusing to me how sedate they kind of still are about it. Like, not recognizing.
I think that is just a British thing.
I mean, hell, look at where we are in 2024, where a Donkey Kong Country theme park effectively is about to open in Japan and in the US. Was there anything else that they brought up that's worth mentioning before we move on?
They talked a little bit about the animal buddies. Yeah, they talked about like why the animal buddies happened. They just wanted like power-ups, and it felt right that animals were the power-up, because it then obviously leads back into that kind of Animal Kingdom world that they've got, the natural world. Rambi was the first one that they'd made. There's a whole bunch of other designs. The elephant that they liked but didn't make it in the first game, eventually did. There was a grasshopper at one point. Greg was really fond of a mole character who could like dig down, but they didn't have the technology. They didn't have the time to implement the technology to like destroy the stages in what they had left. They apologized for the frogs controls.
People love Winky, even if he was a bit inelegant in his movements.
Yeah.
I think that, and that's the thing about the animal buddies, that I don't think anybody developing Donkey Kong games really recognize how important the animal buddies are to the fandom and just the thrill. Even if it isn't the best experience playing as them or on them, it's still a lot of fun because you're on a giant frog. Hell yeah.
Yeah. Or a cool ass spider.
Cool ass spider with sneakers. Yeah. It also like cracks me up knowing what we know now, just how many concepts that eventually wound up in later Donkey Kong games, specifically Donkey Kong Country 3, were first devised by that team for the first game.
And then they kind of went back and had a look, yeah. I think it also kind of is a thing, like, okay, they want to add in some extra elements to the gameplay to, like, just freshen it up a little bit or try some other things in there. But hearing about, like, the struggle that they had trying to get donkeys or DKs, I don't know if it's a donkey, DK's animations and movements going.
So, allow me to explain really quick. So DK is what the majority of people go with. However, I think Donkey is perfectly acceptable. And in fact, if you're just speaking from a pure Donkey Kong perspective, I prefer just using Donkey because Diddy is also...
Everybody already knows is DK. Also DK.
Yeah.
And Dixie.
Yeah.
But not Chunky.
No.
Or Kiddy.
It's preferable. I'll take Donkey or DK over what Dan Alson of Nintendo of America tried to really get going with that first game, where they just referred to Donkey Kong as Kong.
Yeah, Kong doesn't really work. There's already like a property that has that. There's too many Kongs as is, even outside of the purview of Donkey Kong. So to just call Donkey Kong Kong, it's the worst option of the three. Yeah, easily. But yeah, Donkey had a bit of a weird rig because first time using the silicon machines, Kev made a really weird thing, apparently. Because like the way that you rig it up, you've got all the different bones and connections and joints and stuff, which would have been really like early for that kind of technology to start with. But yeah, apparently he just made everything. His aim was more to make it look good than to make it move easy. He had like 2 knuckles or something, and just weird shaped bones. So that was fun. And then trying to figure out how to get him to move across. Obviously, we know all about Twycross Zoo and them filming gorillas, studying gorillas, and studying Chris Sutherland for movement. That took a long time for them to get it. And then it kind of sounds like the movement that they went with was a combination of a horse and some other animal that I couldn't remember.
Yeah, because the way gorillas move is not really suited for a 2D platformer, so they kind of cheated a little bit there, which it works. It works. Like, you know,
it works. If it works, it works, right? Yeah. And that was also something that Greg was like, you have to go through, as a developer, you have to go through so many bad ideas to get to the good one that works, and that you know works because you've been through all this other stuff that just doesn't fit. There's apparently one of the first animations, or one of the attacks for Donkey Kong was like a dunk attack. And they were like fond of it, but it didn't fit.
A dunk dunk?
So, a dunk dunk. There we go. There's a preview for later on in the episode.
It's also a good segue.
3 hours later.
Yeah, it's a good segue as we move from the Donkey Kong Country panel.
Yeah, I think
because Steve Mails and Kev Bayless then had to pull double duty that day because they also appeared on the 10 years of Playtonic, the Road to Yooka-Replaylee panel, which was hosted by Annie Valkama, the Playtonic brand manager.
Shout out to them, by the way. So when I was at EGX, there was no when I was at the Excel Center, there's no map given to you. You just go through, scan your code, they give you a lanyard, nothing else. I remember in past they give you a pamphlet just so you kind of knew a running order of, and in general, where things were. There wasn't for that. I eventually found my way to where the game demos were and found the Platonic one. And then I talked to Annie and I was like, do you know if there's a map of this place anywhere? And it was like, yes, there's one just on the other side of the Platonic booth. So shout outs to them.
See, I made you play Yooka-Replaylee and it ended up saving the day.
It did, yeah. But yeah, they pulled double duty.
Yeah. On the panel was also Gavin Price, the studio director of Playtonic, who's also been on the Kongversation. Head of software Simon Gurgis was also there as well.
It was a good panel. Yeah. The panel. So that happened a couple of hours later from the DKC one. They didn't get through the whole thing. They kind of ran over time and then got ushered out. So that was quite funny. They didn't really tease much of what they're trying to do in the future. They spoke a lot about how the company has changed since Yooka-Laylee and a lot of retrospective thoughts about Yooka-Laylee as well. I thought it was a really good panel, to be honest. It really made me excited for what they have planned, and what they kind of want to do going forward. So the structure of it was sort of they introduced themselves, a little bit about their history, about who they are. So you've obviously got, and obviously their favourite games and what got them into games as well. Gavin was quite cool because he had an Atari. A lot of them started on Atari and Spectrum, which I think you can kind of understand. Other than Simon was mostly not Simon. Annie, sorry. Simon was side-scrolling beat-em-ups, which Kev has also got a big fan of, or is a big fan of the side-scrolling beat-em-ups, Double Dragon in particular. It was Annie who was a PlayStation 1 platformer kind of fan. Yeah, but they were really cool. If you want to point me in a direction here, I feel like I'm blathering a little bit.
They had thoughts on the original Yooka-Laylee, and
yes,
obviously, I like the original Yooka-Laylee for what it is. I recognize its flaws, which are abundant, but I think it's a fun experience for me. I think honestly, I don't have any criticisms with the controls. I thought it controlled better than Banjo-Kazooie. Maybe it's a controversial take, but I thought it just felt a lot more crisp and contemporary than Banjo-Kazooie does. But I do recognize it's inelegant and a little bit obtuse, and it's got stuff that doesn't really blend well as part of the overall package. And I do like it, but it wasn't until Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair came out that it really made me think, oh, wow, Playtonic, they're capable of doing masterpieces. Because there was that question after Yooka-Laylee. I was like, okay, that was fun. I wouldn't say it's spectacular.
It wasn't something that would put them on the map per se. Everybody knew about it because of the Kickstarter, but it wasn't everybody knew it on the merits of the game itself.
Yeah,
I suppose is a fair thing to say.
And there's enough in Yooka-Laylee that appeals to me and my sensibilities, which I feel like are underserved in general these days. And I'm always somebody who's going to view a game on the positive front. I'm not going to focus on the negatives as much in saying did I enjoy that experience? Of course, I'll weight it all when I'm compiling my top 10 favorite games of all time list. And it's well, the Rextro mini games, the Kartos segments, some of the challenges and hidden items. It didn't really come together for me as an overall package that would elevate it to the same kind of plateau as Banjo-Kazooie or, even Grabbed by the Ghoulies or Star Fox Adventures even. But Impossible Lair was like, oh, this is spectacular. This is what I always imagined a Donkey Kong Country 4 from Rare to be. And then 100%. That really made me reevaluate what Playtonic was capable of. And I looked back at that first game and I was like, that is all what, people are going to judge Playtonic for is that first game. And they're not going to look beyond that.
Yeah.
And that's why when Yooka-Replaylee was announced this summer, I was initially like, I don't know, because I just wanted to get to the next thing.
Yes. I think this is a necessary step to the next thing.
Going back and revisiting that first game and kind of having that mulligan, I think might go a long way because so many people ignored Impossible Lair. And it was so frustrating as a fan and advocate of that game because I'm like, what are you doing? Why are you ignoring this? Because you didn't like Yooka-Laylee, but this is something completely different. So I think to get everybody back on board and to get that renewed attention, I think Yooka-Replaylee is honestly smart so long as they don't screw it up.
I don't think they're going to screw up. I think it will take something incredibly off for them to screw that up. And I don't think that's going to happen. I don't know. I sound very confident. But no, I genuinely do feel really confident that they're going to bring something that is a lot more cohesive in all its parts and really hits those fans of 90s 2000s platformers, 3D platformer collectathons. I think it's a lot smarter in what I've played of it, and I think they're in a better place to do it because they did have a reflection, like I'm saying, about their goals then, goals now, and then also why they're doing the Yooka-Replaylee. Why do they want to do that? And it sounds like the problem with the first Yooka-Laylee, or something that held them back from really achieving what they could do, is that there were a small team of people who knew how to make games and how to design them, but they didn't necessarily know all the business side. They didn't have all the other hats that are necessary for game dev, like producers, production, HR, running the business, doing all that kind of stuff. Like Gavin in particular was saying about how many different hats he had to wear during Yooka-Laylee when really all he wanted to do was design and develop for Yooka-Laylee, but he had to do all these other things to get like the business side of it running, to find a space for them to do this stuff. And then they're also trying to figure out an engine that they didn't necessarily know so well. And so a big part of what they've been doing is they have been prototyping and reevaluating themselves internally over the last couple of years, building up to having a lot more understanding of their own kind of engine that they've kind of made, which is would be just modified, I would assume, of something else, or maybe something completely different. That's not really been made public, if there is anything on that. But Simon Gurges sounds like he's headed up a lot of changes to do with the software side of things, and to get this engine that people can go into, try things out, move things around, so they have something that they can interact with a lot better as a whole team. And yeah, trying to also keep a team size down, not letting it balloon out into something with hundreds of people, because they didn't. It's one of the reasons why they wanted to leave Rare, to get away from a lot of the bureaucracy. And I guess that kind of did plague the beginning of Yooka-Laylee, and also just feeling worried about letting down the fans who had trusted them with the concept, their money, their time and all that. because that's another thing. I'm not sure when Yooka-Replaylee's really like targeted to come out, but it does feel like they're looking at stuff, getting feedback from players, feedback from people within the company who necessarily aren't working on the project, and moving it forward step by step to make sure that it is the best possible experience that it can be, rather than worrying about deadlines, getting it out, getting things in there as well. Yeah. I think that's just like a broad kind of image of the general theme of the panel, I suppose. It's 10 years of the company and Yooka-Laylee, and a lot of how they've matured and grown is hopefully going to be evident in how Yooka-Replaylee changes and plays and is hopefully received, because I think it's going to be... I'm very excited for it, and excited for other things that they've got going.
Obviously, you know, I'm pretty open-minded. Once something is announced, I'm not going to just tear it down without any critical thought. And the notion of a new version of Yooka-Laylee has definitely grown on me as the weeks and months have progressed, and we've seen more. They've done a very good job of slow dripping the info from that original
There's apparently
announcement.
loads more info that they have yet to announce or tease or anything.
Yeah.
A particular tease I think I can share
All right.
is that Gavin is excited to see what players think or experience when they put the arcade coin into Rextro's arcade machine. Which is interesting.
Interesting, considering
Yeah.
that was one of the more controversial elements of the first game.
Yes.
Those arcade games, those Rextro games, which just pulled you out of the main experience and were honestly not great. Some of them were
I
fun.
think there's one or two of them were quite cool.
Yeah.
But I think the concept of them is fine, but it's putting them into that Unity engine that didn't necessarily work for them.
Yeah.
That's my personal take on them. Apparently Kev is working on something in Yooka-Laylee. He's got a bit, but he's generally keeping a distance from it because he wants to experience it fresh as well.
Well, that's something interesting, that Kev is working on another project. We already knew Playtonic was doing more than just Yooka-Replaylee. That's kind of an open secret, but it was just nice to have that confirmation that Kev is actively working on something that's not Yooka-Replaylee.
Yeah. It sounds like hopefully that Yooka-Replaylee will revive interest in Platonic, and that they can then put more time and effort into these other projects. Not necessarily effort, but there's more time, I suppose, and that they know that people are going to be interested in these Platonic things. Because their hope is that, like Rare, Platonic has that kind of brand appeal to it that, it's got the Platonic logo on it, that's a must-buy, or a game I have to try out. That's kind of like where they want to get to. And I think after Impossible Lair, or Possible Lair, I don't know what I said, Lair. I think after that, they definitely got a lot more potential in them than what Yooka-Laylee would have, like, from a bystander's viewpoint of just looking at Yooka-Laylee going, this got kickstarted, this isn't very good for a Kickstarter, but then it's like, I just think there's so much around that game that maybe held it back a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, doing a Kickstarter in general and having all these tiers and all these promises, it's basically like game design by committee almost. And there's nothing really organic about it. And I think that really did hurt the original Yooka-Laylee. And so even just fixing 30% of that, if they can, with a Yooka-Replaylee, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. I hope you're right that it does get more of the general populace on board with the characters and the concept. And just from what we've seen, and obviously you played it, which we'll discuss in just a couple of minutes here, but they're taking steps to kind of walk back from that one-to-one Banjo-Kazooie with the serial numbers filed off aesthetic. Like down to the dialogue boxes being different. And they're kind of leaning more into Yooka-Laylee being its own identity, which they started to do with Impossible Lair. And like I said before, it was Impossible Lair and the Yooka-Laylee and the Cracklestone graphic novel that really made me start appreciating them as characters unto themselves and not just Banjo if he was a lizard and Kazooie if she was a bat.
If she was a bat,
yeah. That now they're like, oh, it's Yooka and Laylee, and their world.
But they've got their own adventures. They're not just sort of like pastiches or references back to the good old platformers. They are their own things. They've got their own universe.
I understand why they leaned so hard into that with that initial game and Kickstarter, but we're well beyond that now. And it is exciting to see. I'm glad they're not just saying like, well, Yooka-Laylee, we're just going to move on from it. We're going to do something else. I'm glad they are still trying to make Yooka-Laylee work because it does have its fans. It does have, I think, potential to really expand. And from everything you've said, this idea of keeping relatively small teams, always working on a couple of different projects, having it be structured similar to Rare in the 1990s, but with like concessions,
a bit more openness,
to the modern day. Yeah. I'm glad somebody's doing it. As a fan, as somebody who loves Rare in all eras, but came into Rare and Rare fandom with Donkey Kong Country on, through the rest of the 90s and early aughts. I'm glad they can make games like this still. Yeah,
I think it's an interesting point at the moment for the industry as a whole, where teams are like ballooning out to sizes of about 400, 500 people, in some cases up to 1,000. It feels like at that point you may have worked on something that becomes so successful money-wise, but you'd only done a certain thing. You'd have been told, we just want you to work on the animations for this particular part of the game. Whereas if you're a smaller team, you can go in there and you can go, okay, I specialize in doing this, and I can do this across the entire game and give it a bit more identity, a bit more of me in there, and I can talk to the other people who are there as well, and maybe they, swap ideas around and develop on things in other ways that somebody might not have thought of. So yeah, I think going back to smaller teams might be something the industry does if it becomes financially viable.
I think it's going to have
probably
to,
in a really good. Yeah,
it's untenable. I feel like the way AAA games have evolved, and obviously, like the growth of indie games and indie studios over the last 15 years, it's really been invaluable as far as keeping the industry relatively healthy and giving developers and fans more options if you're not just interested in the latest AAA game that took 10 years to make and is a live service game that will be shut down within a year.
The best. I love those.
Well,
yeah.
Any other tidbits from the panel before we talk about your experiences playing?
I suppose it is just, the company has just got a different structure. They're trying to get people who specialize in the specific areas. It's for Yooka-Laylee in particular. It's Gavin himself. It's like they want to get across that Yooka-Replaylee is like an evolution, and that if there was something that you liked about the original's still there. You can play it, and then there's Yooka-Replaylee, and hopefully that they will have moved it forward, changed a little bit, added different wrinkles to different parts. not sure if you spoke about this with the trailer they put out, but like Nimbus, there's 3 Nimbuses in the race rather than just the one like there was in the original.
Yes,
That's like
Nimble was the original cloud you race in Triple Stack Tropics, and now it's all like a whole
3 of them, family of them.
Yeah. It's just like racing buddies. Little things like that. I'm like, ooh, interesting. Obviously,
like
we haven't talked about it on the conversation yet, but they introduced the concept of marks, which are the bookmarks now that act as fast travel through the worlds. And lots of interesting things that they're adding to it that I think could make it a better game, all things considered.
So I'm going to say this, and I'll probably refer back to it when we talk about the game, but Simon Gurgis was like, asked what about Yooka-Replaylee are you most excited about? And he was saying about one of the criticisms that the levels got was that they're too sparse and large, and there's nothing to do between like sections of them. And he's looking forward to players seeing how that they've changed levels a little bit to put more content in there, or to alleviate the issues of it being sparse. And
interesting.
Yeah, I'll go back to that again later when we talk about Yooka-Replaylee, because I've got some thoughts on that, having played Laylee just recently as well. Gavin's said that they're punching above their weight again in a good way. They've got loads more to reveal and tease. There's new music that they're excited to talk about. And yeah, I think Playtonic is in a good place. And yeah, I want this to be successful so that they can make other games, or the other things that they've got planned, a reality.
Well, you did get to play Yooka-Replaylee, or at least the demo of Yooka-Replaylee, the highly curated demo they had at EGX of Glitter Glaze Glacier, the second world or second grand tome of the game. So, what did you think? How did it feel?
I really enjoyed it. It's the general feel of the game felt really good for a platformer. It was responsive. The characters moved really fluidly. You had access to all the moves. They say it was all the moves. The one that I could immediately think of off the top of my head that they didn't have was a way to fly. So I don't know if that's been scrapped in general for just like a glide instead of being able to infinitely fly. Well, not infinitely fly. You still had the power meter. UI elements have changed. The hearts are slightly different. The power meter is like a little circle near to Yooka Laylee character rather than up in the corner. Yeah, it felt really good. To go back to what I was saying about how the change in sparseness, going back and playing Yooka-Laylee after Replaylee, I was like thinking, okay, when I was playing Replaylee, I was like, I do remember a lot about Glitter Glaze Glacier, and it's just that first area of it. It's not like it's been expanded or anything, so it's just the initial area that you'd have. But it felt you got immediately to the lake part a lot quicker, and then going back and playing Laylee is like, yeah, you've got that jump and then a small path, and then you're at the lake. Trousers in the same place. There's a bookmark down there. They're called Mark. The guy who was on the show floor for it, Mark Bowen, is the one who voices Mark.
Oh, apropos.
So there's a little fun tip for you there. He was like, oh, my name's Mark, I should voice that. And they're like, yeah, go on then. So yeah, he's the voice of Bookmark, which is an interesting thing as well, that there's warp points, because that wasn't a thing in the original, was it?
No,
it wasn't. No. So that's another way to alleviate the sparseness in the levels, you know. They've got the coins as well. That's a new thing in Yooka-Replaylee. I'm not sure what they're used for at the moment. I didn't exhaust the entire demo. I didn't find all the ghostwriters. The ghostwriters are back.
Yes.
in the demo, Vendi had something to do with the ghostwriters. She wouldn't do anything until you'd found them all. So I'm not exactly sure what her thing is, unless it's like, oh, you got all the ghostwriters, that then unlocks the tonic. Don't know what's going to happen with Trouser, if they're going to stick with keeping all the moves there as well.
Right.
Is he then going to sell you something else? Or just give you a refresher for the moves? Or do the moves then upgrade? That's not really been decided yet. It's not been decided as well if you're going to have all the moves to start with. I personally quite liked having all the moves to start with. It felt like I wasn't limited about where I wanted to go in the level. Another thing that's pretty important is the level felt a lot tighter. It didn't feel like I was going over an area of ground that didn't really have anything to do with anything, or it didn't really lead to something immediately. The first thing, or the best way to describe it, is the lake is a bit smaller. It's more together. And the snowdrift part isn't as wide. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to explain it. I don't know. If you don't think I'm making much sense, feel free to stop me and go, what the hell are you on about?
Well, no, I
Stop
haven't played
blabbering.
it myself, so I just kind of take your word for it here. But
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Like,
Yeah.
everything controls really well, I think. The only thing that I'm a little bit dodgy on is the swimming. That took a little bit of getting used to. It's very similar to the swimming in Yooka-Laylee still. Just button hold instead of pressing for certain things. The bubble move is still there.
good.
And it's good. It's a fun part of the character. But I don't know if it's just because it's that level and there isn't much in the water. It just felt like I was just running around in the water.
You did inquire about some things or in discussion, and there's some thought that they might like just scrap the whole expand the tomes aspect.
Yeah.
And just have the tomes be their full constructed selves from the outset.
So, of Glitter Glaze Glacier, of what I played of it, you could go into the isometric palace. I only had like 2 rooms, one of which I'm not going to say because that was quite a fun surprise. But they've completely changed Breeze Block. That boss has completely changed. Just like the way that it's approached, which is a lot better because that was always a little bit awkward, I felt.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had different thoughts about Breeze Block. That one was one of the lesser bosses, in my opinion, from the original game.
I would agree. I don't really have any strong opinions about Breeze Block, which shows how memorable that
Breeze
battle
Block
was. Yeah.
Like, he's got... I'm not saying he. It's got new animations, which is actually quite fun as well. I give it a lot more personality than just a talking ice block.
Right.
That's cool. Looking forward to what they do with the other bosses. Because, yeah, they're going to be interesting, I think. But yeah, so you had that bit of isometric. There's the key underneath is still down there. That was locked. So I don't know if they were thinking at that point they might still expand the tomes. And I think it'd be nice if they do keep that because it is sort of like part of the identity of Yooka-Laylee. That you change the tome in some way, you change the level, because obviously that was a big thing in Impossible Lair as well.
Yeah, although I would say in the original Yooka-Laylee, like the concept is neat, but it always just felt underbaked. As far as just, well, why would I want to be in here when there's just less to do? Like there are ways they changed it up, like Glitter Glaze Glacier. It's just the isometric palace that is the expansion.
That unlocks, yeah.
There's no actual augmentation to the world itself. And then there are things like Galleon Galaxy, where it's just like, oh, what if there's just nothing there before you expand? What if
Yeah, that was a weird one. It's like, you go in there, it's like, okay.
Yeah, it always felt underbaked, and I think, obviously with Impossible Lair, there's a lot more you can do given just the structure of 2D platforming. You can get more inventive, and it's not as prohibitive, but given how boundlessly inventive that, like, made the concept of changing the structure of the world based on what happens in the overworld. I don't know how much you could change that up by just like you pull on too many threads in Yooka-Laylee and it'll just all come undone. So I don't know, but yeah, it's interesting if they do change that.
So yeah, that's a bit up in the air. If it does go, I don't think it'll be a bad thing because the levels or Glitter Glaze Glacier felt really good as a level. There's some new bits to it, which people can explore for themselves when the game comes out. Yeah, it just feels a lot tighter. Everything's a lot closer together is one of the big things that I got going back and playing Yooka-Laylee. It's just together and it doesn't feel like you're spending so much time trying to get to something. You're spending more time doing something to get a pagey or doing a challenge. There's... Again, I don't know what the coins are for, but there's the rings and the coins kind of take you into particular areas. So there's the molecule. Dr. Puzz was in the demo.
Yes.
You got the molecule, which was up on one of the towers. And when you got that, it then made a trail of coins for you to follow. And then, obviously, you get the coins. And it's a little challenge in itself. And it takes you back to Dr. Puzz. So that kind of bit of design comes from them saying, or from people giving them feedback of, oh, I've done this and I don't know where I'm going next with this. Or I got lost on my way from point A to point B. Yeah. So I think that's kind of a clever bit of design. Banjo-Kazooie did it back in the day with how they laid out the notes. So I think this is a pretty good way of doing it. There does seem to be less quills this time around. So maybe the quills are used for something else.
And with the quids, which is what they call the coins, that's their official name, by the way. I would imagine, like, there's just so much stuff that you might want to reduce some of the stuff you had before. I don't know if that's going to be the case or not, but I think they've mentioned that the quids will be used for Vendy, used with Vendy for something. Enough. And of course, they also introduced a new character. I don't know if it was in the demo, probably was Cornelius, the floating, like, ghostly piggy bank that then...
Oh, yes. Yes. Yeah, you touch them and then you get the coin, a little coin challenge, which is quite nice. Yeah. It is just sort of like there's more things in there for you to just do, I guess, is a way, even if it is just a small platforming challenge to lead you to something else. It's nice. It kind of makes the world feel a little bit more... Yeah.
Yeah, you also inquired about the pirate treasure, did you not?
I did, because I was a nosy person who wanted to know about the pirate treasure. As far as the attendant who was there, he didn't know if it was in there. He's not, like, 100% blasted through the demo completely, so it might be in there. But he was sort of saying, surely there will be something in the final game that, if they're not there, then something that represents them will be there.
Yeah, I'm curious how they make it work. Yeah, it's
sort of like... Yeah. I'm curious about what they're going to do about the inept that's counting down, or counting up.
Counting up, yeah. Yeah, that, like, the stuff that was clearly there to be the stop and swap of Yooka-Laylee. What do you do then when you remake Yooka-Laylee and you still haven't paid off said stop and swap? So...
unless they do, in some way.
I'm sure they will. It's not like they can't because of the like console shift, because the way modern hardware works, your save files still carry forward on the various platforms.
Yeah, it's a lot more easy to do that.
I imagine they will on the Switch 2 or whatever it's called, because we know the infrastructure is mostly staying the same. We know Nintendo Switch Online is carrying forward, so. I think
it's the Nintendo Switch Laylee, by the way, is the next one it was called.
Yeah, and did you get your commemorative pagey they were giving out?
I did get a commemorative pagey. It's a very nice pagey. It has Lorem Ipsum on it. I love Lorem Ipsum. And it got some stickers as well. We love stickers. Stickers are great.
We love stickers, yes.
We
So
do love stickers.
you also played Dunk Dunk, which is the
I did play Dunk Dunk.
The Platonic Friends title, which we are giving vigorous attention to at DK Vine because it does have Yooka and Laylee in it as playable characters. It's the first Platonic Friends game to actually have a Platonic character in it since Demon Turf. And this is also like the first time Yooka and Laylee have been playable in a Platonic Friends title, so it's kind of a big deal. It's almost elevated beyond just a cameo game, given it has that direct Platonic pedigree and oversight, despite not being developed internally at Playtonic. It's still being published by them. And for those who aren't aware, Dunk Dunk is kind of a very cartoony, arcadey, like sci-fi fantasy basketball game. And I'm intrigued by it. I know Jeff is like keeping an eye on this one because it has that very #IDARB sensibility to it, that just very over the top, arcadey, almost NBA Jam style sports game that I think appeals to us. And like we love IDARB here at DK Vine. I go on about it too much, but just how overtly silly and bombastic it is. And so it's very exciting to see something similar in the Playtonic neck of the woods.
Yeah, I think it's got quite a bit of potential, to be honest. So you said it's a basketball game, and I think just for people who might not know Dunk Dunk or have seen anything, it's what's the word? It's side-on. It's not 3D.
Right.
So you're on a 2D plane. You've got stages that have different sort of things about them. The stages that I played were like naturally a creepy graveyard.
Yes.
Its kind of thing had doorways that you could close off, so you could like reroute people, make it a little bit harder for them to get to where their hole is. There was an underwater sort of facility that had water pouring in, but like the big thing of it was there's a hole at the bottom of the stage that connects to the top of the stage, so you could go down the hole and come up at the top. The water pushes you around as well. And then there was another one that had bounce pads. That was quite a lot of fun. It's only really got 3 button controls other than moving the character. You jump, you block. Yeah, you jump and block. Pretty much. It's, I think, maybe a little bit tricky to start off with. You just kind of have to like play it, see how the characters move around. Because the objective is it's a basketball game. You're trying to grab the ball, and then you're trying to get the ball into your hole, which is represented by sort of like a glowing hole on the screen. There's 2. There's one for your team and one for your other team. So I don't know if it can only be played 1-on-1. It was 2v2, the demo that I played.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's good fun. I think when you start to get the hang of it, how to block, how to throw the ball, how to get the ball, it becomes a lot of fun, because it is then you can get your opponents to score in their own goal, and then it counts for a point for you. You can just sort of like play around with the different distinctive features of the stages as well to try and give yourself an advantage. Yeah, I think it's a lot of fun, and I think it's something worth looking out for.
Yeah, I'm obviously going to be giving it full coverage at DK Vine. And if you talk about small teams, it's being developed by Badger Hammer Games, which I believe is just like 2 people, maybe? It's very small.
Yeah, it's good work, I think. The art style is quite nice.
I always love seeing like these micro indie studios making good and
like 1 people, 4 people, yeah. Because you can always kind of like, they're always really cool. They always have a really cool core concept to them, And obviously this core concept is basketball, but on a 2D plane.
Yeah.
And it kind of plays in a similar way to like Smash Bros, I suppose, would be a good one for the general audience.
Probably more accessible to the general audience than talking about IDARB, which I always do. And I can feel the...
IDARB is better than Smash, but...
I can feel the eyes glaze in the back of people's heads when I talk about IDARB. But it's got Banjo, Kazooie, Conker, Saberman, Cameo, a Fudgehog, Juno, Vela...
All your favorite rare characters.
All your favorite rare characters. It's got the Killer Instinct 2 cast in there.
Mm-hmm.
It's got Richard Nixon and your mom and some waffles.
Your mom in particular.
Yeah, she's in there. She's part of it. So, we're going to be checking in on Dunk Dunk.
Definitely.
And, when Platonic Friends was revealed, when their, like, publishing initiative
When was that? Was that before Yooka... Was that before Impossible Layer or after?
It was after Impossible Layer. It was kind of like the interim between after Impossible Layer, and then there was several years of what's Playtonic actually doing? All they're doing is talking about Platonic Friends games. But I was excited when Platonic Friends was announced because I was like, this is going to force me to like focus on some indie games that it would just be completely off my radar had it not had that like Platonic sort of seal on it. And, of course, I was also hoping for some, let's be honest, shoehorned cameos from the Platonic cast of characters. And we only got that with Demon Turf. Everybody else has kind of been left to their own devices. And I think they always have the option. If you want to bring in a Platonic character, you can, but you don't have to. You can keep it your own thing.
I was going to say, that might be easier after Yooka-Laylee or Yooka-Replaylee gets established and maybe these characters do start to come out more because... Mm-hmm. Just throwing, like, say, Clara in a game, it's a cool cameo. It's really nice if it fits in the concept of that game, but
sure,
the general audience aren't going to go, it's Clara off of Yooka-Laylee, yeah.
I mean, yeah, a DK Vine will do that, but we're not we're not really enough to make or break a game, unfortunately. So I wish I had that power. I wish I could just, like night a game. And make it prestigious.
The Court of Hammerlot.
Well, no, I would actually use the sword to slit their throats because they're terrible characters. Hate the Knights of Hammerlot.
Didn't see one of those in Glaze Glacier, so...
Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, very exciting times for Playtonic, and it's really refreshing to have a constant source of... news and just that drip, drip, drip of steady hype.
I think there will be a lot of that from them. Yeah.
I go on and on about the video game hype cycle and how much it enthuses me and keeps me going as a fan. And to not have that for anything for the last several years, it is like night and day. It's a very stark thing to suddenly have it again with Playtonic and be like, oh yeah, this week we're getting new Playtonic developer chat, or we're getting like a new trailer, or we're getting something new as far as like a gameplay mechanic that's being unveiled. So it's just very very cool, and I really like how they're doing it thus far. But
it's smart.
Sea of Thieves was also present at EGX.
I was a little bit late to that. Finding my way to it was a little bit, again, the places were not set out very well. But, Sea of Thieves stuff. When I got there, it was a lot of Q&A stuff that they were doing. They've talked about, like, new additions to the Hunter's Call, in particular an emissary flag, as somebody asked, like, you're doing this new stuff for the Hunter's Call. Does that mean that they'll be getting an emissary? And yeah, apparently they will be. They're going to be like brought up to... Because at the beginning of this year, with the big changes to the Void system, a lot of the companies got a bit of a polish. Yes. But Hunter's Call got left out of that. So Hunter's Call is kind of being brought up to that level again.
That's good.
Again, but the rest of them. That's going to be something quite cool. See what that entails. More reason to go fishing, which is nice. Yeah. I like a little bit of fishing in Sea of Thieves. There was a bunch of story teasers about if we're going to meet the cursed captain again, or even Cap'n himself.
Cap'n.
Or themselves. Yeah, Cap'n, a character who's been teased since Tales. Yeah, Tales of the Sea of Thieves, and we haven't really seen anything. They had a bit of a major role in the Dark Brethren tall tale of A Pirate's Life. A Pirate's Life was also kind of spoken about. Obviously, you're going to open the floor up to questions. Someone's going to ask, are you doing another one? And whilst it's not something they're actively working on, it's something they'd like to go back to because they have more ideas. In particular, Mike was like teasing stuff about like, oh, you've got all these different forces. Like there's people who'd want Davy Jones out of the ferry. There's other people who'd want to try and control from outside of the Sea of Thieves. And yeah, that's interesting. Reapers might be getting a voyage, which I don't really know how that will work for Reapers. Is there the guys who go around bullying other people? So,
right. I was like,
how do they get a voyage?
The drifters who just mooch off of everybody else are going to get a job. Yeah.
Apparently, yeah, going to get, they don't want to be like the rest of the trading companies, forced to do work. No. Here's a voyage for you. Go do that work for us.
I say this as a Donkey Kong journalist, mind you.
Yeah, that's fine. Talk about maybe more factions coming into the game. Whether that just means more groups of people than just sort of Flameheart and Ramsey. Obviously, I'm interested in the Dark Brethren as a Sea of Thieves crazy law person that I am.
The Dark Brethren, the Grand Maritime Union.
And the Grand Maritime Union in particular. They're both...
These forces that would be, I think, in opposition to both the Pirate Lord Ramsey and Captain Flameheart and his Reapers.
That'd be kind of cool. Add more people into there. See how it affects the world.
I'm hoping the Cap'n is Captain Black Eye, but I
yes,
realize...
I want that as well.
I realize I'm
very
in
much want
the vast minority because nobody cares about Captain Black Eye. I know.
I've noticed that there's a bit of a Venn diagram. It's like if you were a Rare fan who followed Rare before Sea of Thieves, you want Black Eye as Cap'n. If you're a fan of Sea of Thieves, you're like, I want Captain Hook as Cap'n. And I'm just like,
sucks.
No,
that
Black
sucks,
Eye.
Dray.
No, Black Eye. It does. Black Eye's the interesting one. We need to know more about him.
Here's the thing.
Even if it's like his ancestor.
I realize the Pirate's Life, the Pirates of the Caribbean tall tales were very popular considering it brought in the Disney folk, right? But they've already made certain concessions thanks to that, where the concept of Davy Jones or the Flying Dutchman are forever married to just the way they were
Pirates
portrayed.
Of the Caribbean.
Yeah. In those movies. And so, like, I'm more interested in Rare's own intellectual properties in their own mythology, and that's why I want Captain Black Eye to have a prominent role in the game, because he's been teased since the game launched, and of course Greg kind of sailed under it, Captain Black Eye. However, of course, we can easily retcon that should they introduce him into the game as an actual character, an actual NPC. But yeah, it's just like, come on, you got to throw us a bone here. You put Pendragon in the game, and
they did, yeah. Come on, do more with flesh out your own world, I guess,
exactly,
and develop it and make the little nods and throwbacks to Rare properties. Speaking of Pendragon, actually. Someone did ask, is he going to be sitting in that painting for all eternity? And they were like, there is still more to his story. So he might be coming back. They might have plans to bring him back in some way. They did talk about, this is like elsewhere, not at EGX, that if Pendragon had won the vote, that they'd have done more stuff with Sea of the Damned. So maybe now that we've got the Flameheart stuff done, maybe they'll explore that.
It's weird. It's weird how you say the Flameheart stuff done when it's just
I say it's done. He's sitting in his chair now. Are they happy?
Yeah. Of course, Jeff and I have complained about the way the plot of Sea of Thieves has just stagnated and petered out into nothingness. So it sounds like they've got ideas. It's just if they implement them.
It is about implementation. And I know you won't talk about like season 14 for a while, but yeah, they need to like hunker down and just work on the game and get out some of these promises and stuff, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just need to strike that balance to please all the different types of players again, where I've lamented, again, use that word, that it seems like they're mostly just focused on what the Sea of Thieves partners, the streamers, want. The way they play the game, which is very PvP, which is very messing with other people, which is the constant state of just action and gameplay mechanics. And some of us like the story, some of us like the world building, some of us like to lose ourselves in the world and see how the world evolves over time. And they've really, I think, since the Monkey's Island Tall Tales, have just lost the plot.
I think
literally.
Since like Adventures, it's kind of like fallen to the wayside. The best thing about like season 13 and world evolution is the changes to the small islands. That's quite nice, I think. That's like the biggest kind of world change we've had in a while.
But again,
even then, it doesn't feel like it moves it forward. I don't know.
It's a world change that's just there to facilitate. I don't know it. I've got my criticisms of where the game's gone since the end of Adventures and the conclusion of the Monkey's Island Tall Tales. That being said, I still am a huge fan of the game. I still love it.
I still enjoy it.
And I still think they can course correct, obviously. So it's my only question was, who is at the panel? What rare employees were at the panel?
So the people who are at the panel were Joe Neat, Mike Chapman. Oh, Joe Neat. So do we give them titles as well? I can't exactly remember Shelley's title is the thing.
I've just been calling Joe Neat co-manager of Rare, considering he was just recently promoted to effectively that role.
Yeah, so it's Joe Neat, Mike Chapman, Shelley Preston, and Amy, who is a producer. I want to say it's Amy Robinson, but I don't think it is.
Amy Robinson sounds like the gender-swapped version of Andy Robinson, because I almost took a drink just now.
Take a drink.
Yeah.
Louise Roberts was there as well. She's more in the audience. Yeah, that was the people who was there. And again, the host was Chris Dring.
My question was, where was Greg? Now, obviously, Greg mails.
Greg was at the meet and greet.
He was instrumental in getting Sea of Thieves, the foundations built, and he was on the game in the early days, but then he moved on within Rare to course correct Everwild, is last we heard. But
okay.
So Greg wasn't part of the Sea of Thieves panel?
He was not part of the Sea of Thieves panel. So the timings for the day were 1:15 was the DKC panel. That lasted for about 55 minutes. And then at 2:45 was the Sea of Thieves panel. But after the DKC one, they had a bit of a meet and greet like section with everybody on the DKC panel. And that kind of leaked over. So I don't think there was ever a plan to like have Greg on stage talking about it. I don't know how like involved he's been in Sea of Thieves since he kind of like bequeathed it onto the rest of the team, or onto the team.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know if he'd even like have much to say, because it was more like a year in review, them talking about what the game's been like in the last year, the implementation of easy anti-cheat. People were asking about performance and stability as well. So I think it was more about what's happened in the last year, where like if Greg's not really had anything to do with that, he won't have anything to really add. But he was sneaking around. After the panel came out, he did pretend to be a fan and try to surprise Mike and Joe, which was quite funny. I thought it's nice to see. Yeah, because I think it's quite known he's quite an introverted person who isn't really someone who does a lot of public appearances. So it's nice that he's kind of, even in an odd environment that maybe he's not used to, still being a bit playful.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say sneaking around Sea of Thieves. I'm surprised he was able to do that considering how buggy it's been.
Well, crouching's back now.
Oh, crouching's back now.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. by the time you play, whenever this podcast goes out as well.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you had a good time, despite the social anxiety of it all. Just wrapping it up, final thoughts. What was your favorite moment of the day?
Talking to Gavin Price and just sort of like seeing the enthusiasm that he has for where Playtonic might go in the future.
What was the most miserable moment of the day?
The queues for the toilets.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.